Number 3.
In 2004, I was 15 years old living in central Minnesota. I had hunted on my grandparents' property east of Sandstone since I was 12 and had been fairly successful each year. That season was the same as most, going hunting with my dad and older brother for opening weekend and then trying to get out of hunting whenever I could after that. I think it was around the second weekend when I had one of the scariest hunting experiences of my life. On this particular day, after an unsuccessful morning hunt, my brother and I were walking back to the main house through the woods and decided to walk out to the road instead of trudging through a snowy field. Parked on our property about 40 yards off the road was a white pickup truck that we didn't recognize. We approached cautiously, but the truck was abandoned and there were tracks leading off in the woods in several directions. In the front of the dash was a pile of mail addressed to someone with the last name of Gamble, a name not associated with any of my family or nearby neighbors. My brother and I decided to just head back home and let our dad know about it since there was little else we could do. When we said the name we had seen in the window on the mail, my grandma immediately recognized it. "Oh, that's a lady who lives a few miles away from here." My dad jumped on the four-wheeler to go see if the truck was stuck or broken down and offer help, but when he got down there, a mere 20 minutes after my brother and I initially saw the truck, it was gone. Without any cause for alarm, we all basically forgot about it and swapped hunting lie stories from the morning. After a post-lunch nap, we all mapped out our afternoon hunting strategies and headed out to hit the stands until dark. This is when the story gets good. I was sitting in my stand, lost in thought but constantly gazing around and trying to spot movement or flashes of brown and white. I was deep in thick brush on the edge of a swamp that borders a hardwood stand of trees. It was a favorite spot for afternoon hunts to get the deer as they migrate towards the fields as it gets dark. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of brown to my right. I strained to identify exactly where I had seen it before I saw it again as it slipped behind a pile of brush. I figured it to be about 50 yards away and moving towards me. I lifted my 30-30 Western field lever action to my waist as I stood in the stand and silently slipped the safety to the all position. For several long minutes, I saw and heard nothing. I began to question if I had seen anything at all, or if my imagination was finally taking over after being fooled by squirrels for several hours, when suddenly I heard a low noise from the thick brush. It sounded like a low growling sound, and my first thought was that a wounded deer was going through its dying moments from the neighbor's property to the east. Suddenly, the low growl turned into a distinct growl and then a snarl. My mind immediately went from looking for a wounded deer to looking for a bear. It wasn't uncommon to see bears in the area, but the thought of one being that close was both exciting and nerve-wracking to 15-year-old me. The growls grew louder, and I saw the brush move slightly as the unseen bear moved closer to my stand. I placed the safety back on my weapon, but kept it at my waist. The growling stopped, and then it turned into a snarl and screaming sound that caused my heart to immediately drop in my chest in pure fear. I had never heard a bear make that sound. Suddenly I knew it was a wildcat of some kind. The brush moved, and I finally saw the animal for the first time, about 35 yards away. I had gone from expecting a deer, to a bear, to a wildcat of some kind, and while I wasn't wrong, I did not expect in the least what I saw in front of me. 35 yards away, in the woods in Minnesota on a November day, was a Bengal tiger that had to be 8 feet long, orange with black stripes. A Bengal tiger. I had seen them in books and at the zoo, but I had no frame of reference for what I was witnessing. I immediately had the gun to my shoulder, safety off, and hammer cocked. My hands shook, and I thought for a second I was going to throw up. While it was likely less than 30 seconds, I felt like I stared in shock at the tiger for at least an hour before it snarled once more and then bounded into the woods to the north. I stood in my stand for several minutes until my leg shaking became paralyzing as the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what had just happened came over me. I asked myself over and over if what I had just seen was real. In my frozen fear, I had contemplated shooting the apparition in front of me since I had it in my sights the entire time, but I didn't because I wasn't convinced that what I was seeing was reality. I didn't have a cell phone, so contacting my brother or dad was impossible, but I knew one thing. I did not want to be in the woods in the dark with that thing nearby. I was also less than eager to immediately get down and walk to the house, so I sat in my stand for 20 minutes in the ready position, looking for any sight of a tiger. When I didn't see anything, I got out of my stand and started the longest walk back to the house possible. I walked the entire quarter-mile through the woods with the gun up in the ready position. Every twig breaking made me feel like a tiger was leaping towards me in the growing darkness. Needless to say, my family was skeptical when I rushed in to tell the story of the evening's hunt. They believed I had seen something, but the tiger part was hard to swallow. They figured it was likely a wildcat or a mountain lion at most, but I insisted that I had seen what I had seen. Regardless, we began to get ready for Wednesday night church, and the conversation continued until we got inside. The small country church is composed of mostly extended family members, and we had several relatives visiting for hunting that were mingling and talking about their hunts thus far. Immediately upon walking up to my cousin Scott, who owned and hunted the land adjacent to my grandparents, my dad makes a joke that they had to hear this ridiculous story that I'd made up about my evening. I was barely into the story when my cousin exclaimed, "Oh, you saw the tiger too?" My dad was floored, and I was vindicated. Slowly, the story began unfolding with answers. The white truck belonging to the Gambles was the connection piece. Cynthia Gamble lived several miles from our property, and she owned a large wildcat sanctuary. While the cats were all in cages and tagged with GPS monitors, apparently one had escaped and several neighbors reported seeing her truck wandering around our area in search of the lost cat. Scott had been walking his property the evening before and had heard unearthly screaming coming from the woods. Like my dad, he had assumed a wildcat was responsible until he had been alerted to the presence of the Gamble's truck in the area the following day. By the following day, we had heard from those who knew the Gambles that the cat had been returned, but there was never any official word that it had gotten loose. Being that far out in the country, with little population and even lighter traffic, sightings of the cat by others than our family had been limited if they happened at all. Everything went back to normal, and I had a killer story to share, but no one believed. A year later, however, my grandma shared with us the news that Cynthia Gamble had been killed by the very tiger that had escaped. She was alone in the cage with it, and it jumped her and mauled her to death.
Number 2.
My grandfather was a keen hunter. One night, him and his friend were out hunting in the Terratone Ranges, New Zealand. They had their camouflage on, black paint on their faces, etc. They were walking through the bush when a very large, bright shape loomed overhead. They were shocked and a little more scared, so they hid behind a bank. The shape landed nearby as my grandfather looked over the bank. He saw what looked like a hole on one side of the light opening. He refused to say if he saw anything in the hole. But it was at that point that his friend and him ran back to their truck and drove home. They were both a bit unfit, but sprinted a long way back to the truck. When they got home, they ran inside and bolted the doors. His friend stayed there the night, and they kept their guns with them. The next day, they were starting to think that they had imagined it, or they just had hyped themselves up about nothing. So they decided to go back to where it was during the day, with their guns still. When they reached the spot, they found a large 10mm across or so burnt circle. They decided that they hadn't imagined it and promptly went back home. My grandfather was not a man to scare easily, but never went hunting again, and would never speak about it, other than explain to his wife why he and his friend were sitting with guns pointed at the door.
Number 1.
Location: Pennsylvania, a state park. Summer 1999. 11 p.m. In 1999, I was working at a state park in Pennsylvania and got to know the back areas of it pretty well. The areas most tourists do not go to see. Approximately 1 mile from the park, on a long all-dirt road, was a large clearing in the woods which was cleared for power lines and gas well use. Once you got to that spot, you would have to walk over a long hill until you came to an old abandoned trail. If you followed this trail, it would take you deep into the forest. One day, I followed it and found it led to an old dilapidated cabin, not on the park cabin records, and it looked like it hadn't been used for many decades. Even though it was daylight, I still got this creepy feeling like I shouldn't be there, and worse, that something was watching every move I made. A few weeks later, while I was off duty, 2 of my friends and myself were just out driving around and enjoying the summer night, and since I knew all the back roads, I was taking them on kind of a tour. Other than that mysterious cabin, the park hasn't any secrets. About 11 p.m. I came to that familiar clearing and I mentioned something about the old cabin. Being a brave soul, I talked them into letting me show them the cabin, so I grabbed my flashlight and we took off down the hill and onto the path that led to the cabin. I took the lead and we walked halfway when all of a sudden my light flashed on something on the right side of the path. Almost immediately I stopped and said, "Did you see that?" To which they responded, "See what?" As I panned the light back to the right side of the road, I said, "That." There, standing by a tree, was a creature only seen in sci-fi movies. It had a grayish, olive-colored skin and very thin in its extremities. The calves and forearm muscles were very large as well, was the chest. The face was the strangest thing since it had the typical alien gray-shaped head, but there was no mouth. It had a nose that was long and thin, but no longer than its chin. The eyes had a reddish gleam in the light, but not the size of most reported aliens. Very small, even by a human standard. I hate to make this reference for fear of questioning my sanity, but my first description was like what the goons looked like in the Popeye cartoon. It leaning oddly against the tree, like if you were leaning on an armchair only by one arm. Immediately, everyone wanted to leave, but as we turned, my flashlight went out. My friends told me to quit messing with them, and to turn the light back on, in which I informed them that I wasn't messing with them, and to keep moving now that I was at the back of the group. I frantically continued to beat on my flashlight trying to get it to work again. As soon as it came back on, I immediately swiveled back around to shine it behind us. The creature had moved up significantly, and now was on the left side. We hurried to the clearing, and once we got back up the hill to the main road, things got worse. Out of the woods we had just come through was this high-pitched, blood-curdling screeching noise which, after it started, others started to answer back from the other side of the clearing. The fact that I was a park ranger, had been in the woods all my life, and had my degree from Penn State in wildlife management means I've heard a lot of noises in the wild, but I've never heard that sound before. I know it wasn't any kind of owl or bird or bobcat or porcupine, you get the drift. Once I told my dad about the encounter, he told me it could have been a chupacabras, which I had never heard of before as far as aliens go, never believed in it until recently. Months went by without incident, other than not being able to shake that "I'm watching you" feeling. I was to the point of feeling like I was being stalked. One night, I went to get something from my truck when I looked into the woods and saw those reddish glowing eyes staring at me in the shadows. I immediately ran into the house and grabbed my biggest knife. I'm not a gun guy. To which my dad asked me what the hell I was doing. I told him I was tired of feeling stalked and was going to face this thing. He told me he was coming with me, but all along I knew he was never truly believed me or my encounter. When we got outside, he nonchalantly asked, "Okay, where did you see this thing?" And I pointed to the spot to which he directed his flashlight. Much to his belief, there it was, and as soon as the light hit it, it tore off deep into the woods. My dad, an ex-Marine who served proudly during Vietnam, yelled at me to get back into the house with fear. To this day, it still creeps me out telling this encounter, and my hands shake even when typing while recalling it. I am now in my 30s with a wife and kids, but even now, when I go outside at night, I still feel watched, to the point when I get a real strong feeling my wife won't let me leave the house without her. Just as a side note, for the first 5 years of our relationship, she too would catch sight of this creature, but mostly as it was going into the shadows. As a further note, if anyone is questioning it, there were no drugs or alcohol or any other substance involved during this or any other encounter I have had.
Hey guys, I want to give a big thank you to the Gr1m Sleep3r and Hitch Hiker for helping me out with this video. They both have great channels with a lot of cool content, so don't forget to check them out, share, and break their like buttons. I will include links to their channels in the description below, and there's most likely annotations on screen now. I also wanted to say, I know my channel has been pretty slow lately. I've had tons of pretty cool projects with other narrators in the making. With Halloween approaching, if you haven't had your fill of Goodnite Goosebumps yet, you definitely will come next month. That being said, I finished most of the work for other channels, and I'm ready to focus on my own again, so expect to see a little more activity from me. As always guys, please continue to subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you all so much for the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one.